Ready.
And action. Good morning. My name's Tim Hughes. I'm a senior director with with Discovery Communications. I am the technical architect. I lead the SAP ABAP and basis teams and any of our web initiatives, which includes CPI. I've been doing SAP now since 1997, 20 plus years. I've seen pretty much every technology from SAP GUI 2.2 to now what is Fiori and UI5. Dan?
My name is Dan Rampy. I've been doing ABAP development since 2001, and I've been doing web development since the late 90s. I have a company, Upper Tech Consulting Group. We've been working with Neptune Software in the US for the last 4 or 5 years, doing technical implementations. And I've been working with Discovery for about 1.5 years now, doing the same thing.
So Fiori Elements without the elements. As I mentioned, I have very technical in SAP. I built Fiori Elements reports using our current SAP ECC Suite on HANA environment. I've also built some approval apps using WebIDE, which is when I decided we needed to buy Neptune. And so there are some challenges that we have with WebIDE and Fiori Elements given the release that we're on. So I asked Dan to take a crack at building a similar architecture with Neptune and just regular ABAP backend calls. And we're gonna go over that here today and see what the differences are. So the requirement that I gave Dan and the requirement that everybody has really is to replicate the features of an SAP GUI ALV. That kind of has become the gold standard for all SAP reporting. It's really quite simple. SAP has attempted to replicate that in every one of their web-based interfaces, including ABAP Web DenPro via the Web DenPro ALV, and also a much more advanced version with something called the Personal Object Work List. These ALV templates it's widely templated at client sites. Almost every consultant comes to a client site with either an include or a template report, so they can generate fast, friendly UIs very quickly. The next question is, how do we get them on the web? Obviously, as I mentioned, WD, ALV, and POWL were there for Web DenPro. SAP's approach to put that on UI5 is the Fiori Elements. Before I dive into Fiori Elements, I do want to mention that we're going to have to talk about our architecture, which is not S4, which provides some limitations on what we can and can't do in Fiori Elements. So the Fiori Elements discussion I'm going to give you is not going to teach you how to build a Fiori Elements report. It's more of just an overview of the steps that are going to be required, which are building your core data services for data selection, annotating your core data services for UI components, UI elements that show up on the report, generating the ODATA services, and then finally talk about the limitations that exist if you're in a non-S4 environment. Due to those limitations, as I mentioned, I had Dan develop a Neptune template approach using SAP's UI5 controls and a reusable template, and he's going to cover that. And then lastly, we'll just summarize the differences in what you can and can't do with Fiori Elements and our templated approach with Neptune tools. So starting with what is the real requirement here. SAP ALV grid reports have been around, I think since release 4. At any rate, the gold standard here is you're able to provide selection criteria on a report, save that selection criteria with the ability to pull down search helps using SAP's data dictionary. You define a layout variant, and then users can, on their own, change those layout variants, define their own filters, define their own sorting grouping, totals and subtotals, have those totals and subtotals make sense when there's multiple currencies, provide drill down via hotspots and menu actions if you change the menu bar to export to Excel, or do anything you want to customly. Using ALV templates, which everybody's got one, it's really quite simple. You just define a data structure, you define the selection screen, you retrieve the data, and then the front end is generated by the ALV control. And all you have to do then is handle actions coming back from that control. So that's kind of where you want to go. That's the gold standard. Just a quick piece about our architecture. We have got what SAP once defined was the right way to do this in a Fiori Launchpad hub approach. I believe they've now said with S4 to not do that, but we have a hub approach, which is a separate front-end server with a mixture of Neptune and SAP apps and multiple backends. Our front-end server is running Fiori Front-End Server 4.0. That's currently in the middle of an upgrade, but that's basis 7.5 and UI version 7.51, and we have Neptune 5.21 running there. On our backends, we have SRM, which have a couple apps that are running against SRM, which is SRM 7.4, again, basis 750, and of course, Neptune running on the back end as well. Most of our apps run against SAP Business Suite on HANA, which is Enhancement Pack 8.8, Support Pack 0.8, which is also basis 750.09. I will tell you that basis 750 really limits a lot of things that we can do with regard to Fiori Elements. As I mentioned, we got a couple of SRM apps, and then GRC, which actually is on 752, but we don't write custom apps on GRC because the apps were delivered by SAP. So Fiori Elements, like I said, I'm not going to teach you how to build a report with Fiori Elements. I'm just going to show you what can be done and what we did. So this is an example of a report using Fiori Elements. It looks pretty much like an ALV. You can define a filter bar variable. You can save those variable selections as a variant. The end user you define a structure in the CDS view. The end user can come in and define layouts. They can define filters and sorting and grouping and totals and subtotals. There's subtotals and subtotals are currency aware, just like they were in ALV. You can export what is generated here to Excel using associations and links in your CDS view. You can navigate to a detail page. So pretty much everything you have in the ALV, Fiori Elements does a pretty good job of. The one thing that you can't do now in 750, and this limitation, is there's something called actions, and in S4 1909 they have what's called unmanaged behaviors, which we'll talk about later. So CDS views, the reality is with Fiori Elements, the entire front end is generated with a wizard, pretty much. So everything comes down to your CDS views and your annotations, and of course the ODATA that's generated from that. In terms of CDS views, there's two types of CDS views. There's your data selection views, also known as base views. And those base views, you need to include annotations, which are called semantic annotations, which are kind of data dictionary-like annotations. Those base views are then consumed by consumption views, and those consumption views have UI annotations, and those UI annotations are going to drive what your screens look like. And then lastly, there's a single line of code and a CDS view that will generate ODATA from that CDS view. You can also send that CDS view over to a transaction SEGW and generate ODATA that way, which that's the old way, and it doesn't generate the annotations, I don't think, so that's not really a good idea. As far as annotations go, I've provided a link here to the SAP Annotations website that I was using back when I was building this stuff, and there's multiple types of annotations. It's a completely new syntax. It's not simple to learn, and it's somewhat difficult to find out what annotation works with what version of SAP. But one thing we do know is we need to select data with a base view, and you can see here with my little single report, which was quite simple, I have 2, 4, 6, 7, 9, 11, 12 views to define the selection of my data. And the reason for that is there's no procedural logic in CDS views. It's pure SQL. And you have to get quite, you have to really think out of the box sometimes to build something in SQL that doesn't have procedural logic, such as calculating running totals. You cannot call, you can't call a function module or a class to go get data. You have to pretty much build it all in SQL. Starting with starting with S4 1809 Cloud or S4 1909 on-prem, they have a new capability to call a class from with CDS view using something called unmanaged behaviors, which is remarkable that it took that long to figure out that that would be a problem, because 99% of reports that most people write call some function module or some BAPI or BADI to, or not BAPI, but call some function module or some BAPI to retrieve data. On the front end, or the consumption view, you need to build annotations to display things like what text you want to display on the screen, or whether you're going to make that default variable for filter bars, or whether that variable is going to be mandatory for the consumption view. So your consumption annotations, and there are many, are going to define what your interaction looks like on the screen. I will say that there's some limitations with these consumption annotations. Other than the unmanaged behaviors, there's a number of these things that are available in 7.52 basis release that are not available in 7.50. So in those cases, for example, export to Excel, or display variants, or sorting or grouping, we have to use what's called the annotation modeler, and I'll show you what that looks like after the report is generated. And then lastly, once you've built your CDS view and you've got your annotations for both semantic as well as consumption, you need to generate the ODATA service, and that is done by simply putting @ODATA service publish equal true and hitting activate. That will generate a class for your CDS view. It'll also generate an annotation file for WebIDE, and it will create a service that you need to activate on your gateway server. Skipping all the gateway server and all that setup in connection to WebIDE, you're going to go into the WebIDE Fiori Elements wizard, select your base view, select your view for navigation, hit finish. It's pretty much very wizard-like. After that, you would then go into the annotation modeler and add things that you could not do in your CDS view, which in our case, since 7.5.2, we don't have 7.52, we had to add a presentation variant, had to add sorting and grouping, had to add Excel export, and then had to add what our object and object page facets were going to be. Facet is a concept in an object page, which I'm not going to discuss here, but you will become familiar with them if you start to build reports this way. So what did we learn? We learned that there's no easy way to select data except through SQL only. There is something called a table function even in 7.50, but that requires the use of passing a parameter. And Fiori Elements doesn't pass parameters, it passes filters. So there was no way to even call the table function. So you're pretty much limited to SQL only. As a result of that, you're going to get many, many views needed to do some very basic things. And it's not easy to do many things like calculating running totals, and you can't call class or function, BAPI user data get. You have to define a SQL statement for everything. CDS annotations, things like search helps and actions taken, severely limited in 7.50. And then the documentation itself on finding these annotations is quite sparse. It's getting better, but it was not easy. This first report took me over a month, and I probably could have done it in 4 hours using ALV or even WebDembro ABAP. So I asked Dan, since we're using Neptune for other things, take a look and see how close you can get to developing a ALV-like or Fiori Elements-like report using Neptune alone. So Dan, why don't you show us what you've done?
All right, I'm gonna request control just now. All right, so what we wanted to do in Neptune is, as Tim was saying, the annotations are kind of inflexible. They're not a real programming language. It's hard to actually modify things in Fiori Elements. So we wanted to build something that was based on primarily ABAP code, and of course JavaScript for the front end code, giving us kind of a lot more flexibility and hopefully a quicker time to develop reports. It was also important that we had a reusable template like he was mentioning earlier, so that it'd be similar to old school ALV reports. So I'm going to show you what we've come up with for that. So the first thing we had to do was figure out what's actually in a Fiori Elements report. The actual report template we used is called the list report floor plan. It's documented in a SAP Fiori design guidelines document that's available on their website. But that document doesn't exactly spell out what the specific controls are from a technical perspective. So we generated a report with Fiori Elements and then dissected it in WebIDE to figure out what the actual components of it are. So on top, you have a filter bar. This allows you to specify selection criteria. The way that works is kind of similar to how a selection screen would work on an ABAP report. You have filter criteria that are either required or not, and you can specify all of those as if they were select options, meaning you can have ranges, exclusions, and all that kind of stuff. And you can hook up search helps to those just like you would be able to on an ABAP field. Underneath you have, there's a table control with a settings dialog that allows you to do sorting and grouping on any column in the table. And you can also do further filtering in that control. You have two different types of variant management. One of them saves the filter bar criteria and the other one saves your visual changes to the table layout. And then the table control itself is called a smart table. And this has a bunch of advanced features that aren't normally available in the regular SAP UI5 table, like multiple levels of grouping and total and subtotal lines. Kind of expanding on that whole smart control concept, most of the controls in a Fiori Elements report are so-called smart controls. What that means is that they're bound to an annotated ODATA service that does a lot of things automatically for the developer without them having to write any code. In fact, you really can't write code against it. You have to drive what they do with annotations. So we looked into trying to use these because especially the smart table control is kind of, it's got features that just aren't available in other SAP UI5 table types. but it turns out you can't actually use these controls without hooking ODATA services up to them. They just don't actually work at all. There's no way to do it. So what we did was we fell back on the regular versions of all these things. So there's a regular filter bar control, regular variant management controls, and then of course regular table controls that we're all already familiar with if we've done development in Neptune. So by falling back onto those, of course, we ended up having to write a lot of code to make them function like the Fiori Elements report does. So what we're talking about here is extensibility. We have some dynamic report generation features that are pretty important to what we're trying to accomplish. And we accomplish that on the front end using Neptune's extension feature. So you can see in the screenshot, we have a base template report, and then developers who want to use it to generate their own reports would just extend that. What this accomplishes for us is the developers who use the template get a lot of functionality for free. They actually get their entire UI generated for them without having to do anything on the front end at all. And then they're able to, because the extension feature is pretty, it's very nice and very flexible. If they want to do their own specific things that we didn't think of in the template, they're free to add. They can add extra controls. They can add extra JavaScript code if they're good with front-end development, and anything you'd normally do in a Neptune report. But what's nice with the base template report is they don't have to do any of that. If they're happy with the features that we've provided in the template, they'll actually be able to get off the ground with one of these without writing any JavaScript at all. So going further with that, what we've provided in the back end is a template class. Developer using this would subclass this, and then they would override the default variant method. In that, we call something that I'm calling a dynamic table API, which is an ABAP utility class that provides a lot of ALV-like methods. For instance, you can set column widths on the table. You can set column visibility. You can set default search criteria, required fields, all that kind of stuff that you'd want to be able to do. And we'll be going through all of those features in the next few slides. Then the other thing you override in the subclass would be the selection. So you'd provide your own data structure that you build just in regular SAP data dictionary. And then you would override the select data method and put a select statement in there to provide data to the report. If you did this and just wanted the base features of the template, it would take you about 50 lines of ABAP code is all. And we've been able to generate reports in about half an hour doing this. This is what the actual output of the template report looks like. This is our reference implementation. It's actually the same report that Tim created using Fiori Elements, just using our template instead. It looks pretty close to identical. You can see here we've got this screenshot that has like most of the features of the template visible. So you can see there's some cell coloring and some grouping and stuff like that, which I'll be going through in detail shortly. So this shows some of the features that we've added to this thing. You can see we did do the split variant management just like we had in Fiori Elements. So you have two different variant management controls. The top one manages your selection criteria. So that would actually save which filters were visible in the filter bar and what the values you put in there are. So you can save all of that. The normal way that SAP handles that variant management is through a Fiori Launchpad service. We decided that it would be simpler to just store them in our own tables instead in this case, because the data structure that you're saving isn't very complicated. So that was a faster way to develop our variant management. The filter bar is next there. So what happens with the template is the developer who subclasses the template would specify which fields should show up by default and possibly default some values into them. You can see I've set the fiscal year as a required field in this case. That's also something you do from the ABAP class. And then the user can add more filters to the bar. So any field in your data structure that's selectable can be added as a filter as well. At the bottom, there's another variant management control that saves your table layout. So that would save things like the widths of your columns, which are all adjustable, the order of your columns, which can be dragged around and changed, and then visibility of columns and grouping and sorting order. So all that stuff can be saved as its own variant, separate from the selection variant. On the right, you'll see buttons for table settings dialog and export to Excel. Those features are as close as we could get them to the original Fiori Elements version. So if you were going to add extra filters to the filter bar, this is the dialog you would get. It's the same dialog they used in Fiori Elements. So you see your default filters there, and then there's a link that says more filters, and that'll give you the rest of the fields that are available for selection in your data structure. You can add those to the filter bar, they're optional, and that way you can get a more complex filter arrangement. This is the table settings dialog. This allows you to pretty much customize everything in your table layout. We're using a SAP UI5 control. It's a complex control called P13N dialog. So this entire dialog is one UI5 control. It has 3 tabs on it. The columns tab just allows you to reorder and set column visibility. And then you can set group sorting and grouping orders. One feature that we've added that SAP doesn't normally provide with their grid table, as they call it, is hierarchical grouping. Normally, SAP only lets you specify one level of grouping with that table, and you have to use the so-called smart table to get extra levels. But we actually took apart the source code of how they did that with their analytical table and added it to the regular table so that you'd be able to have that feature, because this was an important feature for discovery. So what that does when you set multiple levels of grouping is it allows you to have complex subtotals. So for if you have 2 levels of grouping like I have in the screenshot, then you get a subtotal for each combination of, in this case, fiscal year and company code. We also did make those subtotals currency aware, as Tim mentioned earlier, which means that if you associate a unit of measure like a currency with a column, like I have in the screenshot, then if you have different currencies within your group, like if I had some lines that were in USD and some lines that were in euros, we'd be able to split those subtotals onto separate lines so that they're meaningful. And then, of course, the green total at the bottom would then also be split out by currency in that case. So those are some advanced features that Fiori Elements had built in that we had to go and kind of backport to the non-smart controls. And then we've just added some extra functionality that you'd expect in an ALV report in this case, like being able to style cells with colors using CSS. And then we also added support for hotspots, which means you can specify that a column should be rendered as hyperlinks instead of text. And then if you click those, it'll actually call back into the ABAP class so that the ABAP developer can do some custom logic. This particular link is to a cost center and would go read cost center information from SAP and then show it in a pop-up dialog. On the right side, we have a detail navigation link. When you click that, you'll be taken to a default detail page that the template renders. This will show all of the fields in your data structure. The user is able to specify field groups for anything that's in there, which will be rendered as navigation links at the top. And then you can see how those groups are actually output there, where I have a cost center group with just 2 fields in it, the cost center and its description. And then I have a GL account group below that has the GL account and its description. And then anything the user doesn't specify as a group goes into a general data section where you can see everything else. On the right side, we have some full screen and split screen controls, which are also standard on the Fiori Elements report. These take advantage of a SAP layout called the flexible column layout, which is one of their standard design guidelines. What that does is if you have a really big resolution, you can actually have the list and the detail page shown at the same time, and then the user can actually resize the divider between those and all that kind of stuff that you'd expect in an advanced SAP UI5 Fiori report.
So in summary, we've taken a look at ALVs. Everybody knows what an ALV is, Fiori Elements and Neptune Elements, if you will. We want to have a templated approach. We can do that with ALVs. We can do it with Fiori Elements, obviously, and now we have a template to do that with Neptune development. The actions that the code that we're going to write to go get the data, use value helps for filters and custom actions for ALVs and our Neptune application. That's all ABAP, right? ABAP dictionaries, ABAP class methods. For Fiori Elements, it's all annotations. And unfortunately, the version that we're on, we're pretty much stuck with SQL views and filters. We can't do value help using the dictionary at all. And we really can't take advantage of behaviors and calling function modules until we get to 1909. As far as all the other feature lists, Dan hit it out of the park. He incorporated everything that Fiori Elements does with their smart tables, just like we do in ABAP. So to wrap things up, I think that what we've built with Neptune is going to help us through the next couple of years until we can get to S4 and build some fast reports using Neptune. And with that, we'll open it up to questions.
Cool.
All right.
Nice one. Thank you, guys.
What'd you guys think? We're good?
We're
I think
good.
it went pretty well, yeah.
Awesome. Let's see, no pings, so that's good.
Say what?
I said no one had any pings or calls, so that was good.
That
I
was
had to be
good.
really, really careful not to move because I have this super squeaky chair. It's like, I was just like still as a statue that whole time.
You did great. You would have never known.
So how long did that total, like from the start of the recording to the, instead of, all the
Probably like
monkey-
25-ish, 30 minutes, I would say.
Yeah.
That's good. I think we both talked a little longer than when we tried to rehearse it yesterday because we were coming in at like 19 minutes yesterday.
Oh, well, we slotted more time for you guys, so that's totally fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we're good.
Yeah,
Daniel will
we're great.
work his magic with our intros and outros, and we'll be ready to go for next Thursday.
All right.
All right.
Cool. Thank you guys so much. Have a lovely
Yeah,
weekend.
thank you
Are you,
guys.
are you guys going to send us the edited version at any point?
Certainly can do if you'd like to have a look.
I would.
Cool.
Okay.
I think I should probably have it ready for Tuesday end of play. We're waiting for we're waiting till we had everything before we started work with the editor just to manage that resource.
No, that's fine.
Cool. Well, I will share with Karina and she can pass across to you guys.
And
Yeah, and then I'll send you guys an invite so you can actually jump on the platform and kind of start playing around if you guys don't mind.
Sure.
It'll come from my name at spotme.com, and if it goes into your spam, just take a look.
Okay.
But I'll let you know when I send that out so you can be on the lookout for it.
All right.
Sounds like a plan.
Thanks.
Awesome. All right.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Enjoy your weekends.
Yep.